Today, we're going to talk about reinvigorating your career with organizational psychologist Nick Tasler, who was featured in podcast number 9 back in May of 2020. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another FUTRtech video podcast. The audio version of this podcast is available on the Apple Podcast platforms and Spotify and most of the others. Or you can find it at FUTR.buzzsprout.com. When we first talked to Nick in May of last year, he was trying to figure out what he was going to do as the events industry went into lockdown, effectively ending his work as a keynote speaker. At that time, we talked about pivots, and Nick made a great pivot. Nick is now a content producer and has come a long way from where he was back in May. Today, we're going to catch up with Nick and find out what went into his pivot and his transformation and how he took this opportunity in a time of pandemic to reinvigorate his career. And maybe it'll be some good advice as to how you can reinvigorate your career as well. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sandesh.
Great to have you back, man. Great to have you back. We talked to you almost a year ago now. I mean, it's been a while, and it was right at the front end.
It feels like it's been a decade.
Yeah,
actually,
doesn't it? I mean, we've lost all sense of time. But I think that the thing that was really interesting was we were kind of at the front end of our podcast journey, and we were looking at the pandemic and really trying to make sense of sort of some of the mental health aspects of it, and how to get out of your own way to be successful in a pandemic thing. And we talked to you from an organizational psychologist perspective. But the thing that was really interesting is at that time you had been faced with a very different world, and because you were traveling and giving speeches and talking to corporations and doing all that, and all of a sudden travel's out of the question, and there you are. And I think that's sort of the beginning of this really interesting pivot story that you have that I want to let you tell.
Yeah. Well, interesting is one way to describe it. I can think of some other adjectives. Yeah, I mean, so essentially basically my fortunes are linked to the hospitality industry. Yeah. So even if you don't know anything about, what the life or business of a keynote speaker is like, just look at, well, what is it like for a hotel and an event planning business or person? And that's essentially it. So like my fortunes followed theirs. And so, it was all of a sudden, it was, like at this point, it's cliche to say it was a black swan incident, but that's really what it was, right? So how do you take this, everything involving travel and in-person, and it's like, it's affected us all, obviously, right? But it's not like that's a part of what my business was. That was 100% of what my business was. And so not pivoting really was not an option.
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting because, I mean, when we were talking to you, like many other people, were sort of going through the things like, what the hell do I do next, right? I mean, you mentioned your whole livelihood kind of went away, and I think it was interesting timing, that you were, doing our podcasts and sort of really thinking through those issues. So, you've obviously come a long way, and I'm going to show some video of what you're doing now.
Your unwavering commitment to love and generosity shaped your response in spite of all the adversity. Or maybe you just want to tell a funny story about how this unbelievable string of bloopers and setbacks and catastrophes in 2020 taught you not to take life so seriously.
You shifted hard and you shifted well.
Yeah. And, it's I think there's kind of like, there's two what I want to say, two aspects of that, two trains that were running on parallel tracks, pulling me toward this pivot. And one is the fact that I speak about and write about and have expertise in adapting to change.
Yes,
right.
So
right, exactly.
I'm still getting. I'm being asked to talk to all these people in every kind of industry you can imagine about how do you adapt to change? How do you deal with disruption when it's happening to you and you didn't choose it and yada, yada, yada. And it's always been sort of like this, something that's happening to other people. And I've decided to make some changes in my life in the past that gave me some expertise on it and some personal experience with it. But this was the first one that was, aside from like having kids, this was the most major external force that disrupted my whole way of being.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, all right, well, I need to practice what I preach, for one thing, just so I'm not a total hypocrite, right? I'm telling all these people, you can do it, and here's how you do it, and you follow this step and that step. Well, now you're living it, buddy. This is life imitating art here.
Yeah.
And so I had to do that, and then at the other time, and this is the part that I think is relevant to all of us, which is I had some things that I wanted to do, technology related, and this has really been, I would say, one of the major storylines of 2020 for business, for corporate, the corporate world, and really businesses in general. Is, we talk about how the digital transformation that was estimated to take 5 to 10 years happened in 6 months.
Yeah.
In virtually every industry and every company that's still alive today. And it was a similar thing for me, in that there were things that I wanted to do that, that I maybe wouldn't have called them digital transformation. But there were things that had always been like on the back burner, and they were never a priority, but I'd been thinking about them for 3, 4, 5 years. And all of a sudden, the shitstorm hit and/or the stars aligned, depending on whether I want to be pessimistic or optimistic about it, right? And it just all of a sudden like forced you. Now's the time. It's these things that you've had on the back burner are now suddenly like make it or break it essentials. And the liberating part about that is all of a sudden it was really easy to make those nice to haves an immediate priority. It made a lot of sense to wake up every morning and focus on digital transformation. In a way before, it was like, tech people trying to drag the rest of the company along. And like in my head, I've got my own like tech person and non-tech person, And all of a sudden when the pandemic hit, the tech person sitting on this shoulder or, on this side of the brain was like, okay, I got the wheel now. I'm the one in the driver's seat. So you just shut up and listen to me. Yeah. And that's how it happens, psychologically.
Well, you have, I watched an interesting video of yours, and it was basically you said, in 10 years, how are you going to tell your story of 2020?
Ask yourself, in 10 years, how do I want to remember telling the story of how I responded to this crisis? This simple question capitalizes on a phenomenon that psychologists call temporal distancing, which is really just a fancy way of imagining yourself in a distant time or place. And by asking that question, it shifts your brain's focus from the crisis to the main character's response to that crisis. In an instant, your strife becomes a story.
Basically, you said, either you're going to tell it like, oh God, it was a disaster, everything was horrible, I suffered and I sat inside and I couldn't take it, or you're going to have this amazing story of transformation, right? And it's yours to choose, right? Yeah. And clearly you've done it, we've done that, but I do think a lot of people are kind of mired in that downward spiral of what 2020 did to them rather than what they did in spite of 2020.
Yeah, well, and I think actually, Chris, I think if all of us, if we're honest, we're all both of those people depending on the time of the day. Yeah. And like if we didn't get a lot of sleep last night, we're a victim of 2020. If we just close the deal, we're a hero of 2020. And you know what I mean? And it's like, it's so situationally dependent and mood dependent. But I think the point, I guess, of that is that we're all capable of looking at it in both of those ways. And so it has to be a conscious choice of which way I'm going to do that. And, what you're talking about, the in 10 years, well, that's just there's this idea called psychological distancing that I'm trying to think now, we might have talked about this on the first podcast. Yeah. But anyway, this notion of psychological distancing is like how your brain shifts by separating yourself from the situation. You can do that in numerous ways. You can do that by saying, if I were somebody else, and you can define somebody else. If I were, if I were a woman in India right now, how would I look at my situation? Right. Or if I were a technology executive in Silicon Valley, how would I look at my situation? You can however you want to do it. And then another way to do it is just not looking as though you are somebody else, but like you in the future. And that's where the in 10 years. So, we're actually, one of the things that human beings are really good at is imagining the future. Yeah. It's also what creates a ton of anxiety that other animals don't have to deal with. But when we use it for good, we're actually really good. If we say, okay, in 2030, what's the world going to look like? We can paint a pretty clear picture if we want. Yeah. And we can imagine, I'm going to be 52 years old. My oldest kid is going to be, out of college for 2 years. And, all these things that are like, whoa, this is kind of crazy. But if you can put yourself in that place and look back and say, now, when I'm looking at it from that removed perspective, what do I want to remember doing and not doing? And one of the things that invariably comes up, and of course it depends on your personality and your disposition, etc., but we tend to be much more focused when we look at our future self looking back on today. We tend to focus much more on the prospect of missed opportunities rather than kind of the day-to-day. We think more about sins of omission rather than sins of commission. Yeah. In 10 years from now, you don't want to remember playing it safe. You're going to be pissed off at yourself if there were opportunities that you didn't take. Yeah. Whether it be, you didn't ask that person out for a date. You didn't take that job. You didn't invest in that company. Those are the things that right now you're like, I'm going to play it safe. Better to be safe than sorry. But your future self, wants to give you a kick in the pants for doing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's,
that's interesting because we talk so much about social distancing. You got like the emotional distancing piece in there, which is I think that's a really good way to look at it. But I think one of the things that's interesting, and I would love for you to speak to it, and I think you kind of have a parallel path, to what Sundish has been going on. And I think the thing that's interesting about like my pivot versus your pivot versus Sundish's pivot is when you pivot. Playing to your strengths is a great thing. And everybody has a certain set of skills that they bring to the game. And I think you kind of want to focus on those. And, you have a set of skills. Sundish has a set of skills that are not mine, probably. And so, like, for example, I know Sundish, is embarking on this whole new, podcast with Super Brown, which is amazing. But Sundish's skills, he's great at acquiring talent and putting the people together and having conversations. But he doesn't come from a background of having filmmaking skills or photography skills and things like that. So I think the point is that look at what you are good at and focus on doing the things you're good at, and where you're not good, it's great to ask for help because you don't want to get stuck, like you said, not doing the thing that you want to do because you just, can't ask for help, right? Yeah. I think that's a big piece of it. So tell me a little bit about like how you, made this pivot.
Well, a big part of, so talking about my skills, what I have and what I don't have is, okay, so I'm very competent and knowledgeable about psychology and how to, working with organizations, how to talk about that on a stage in front of people. What I didn't have was technology skills. And in a virtual world, that became a glaring deficiency, right? And, we always talk about, right, you can build it or you can buy it,
right.
In terms of talent or whatever. And initially, I decided I need to do both. I need to get more. I need to acquire a baseline foundation level of knowledge about what I'm doing here. But in my pivot, in order for this pivot to be successful, I don't have time to wait for me to climb up the learning curve by myself.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was really fortuitous for me about at the beginning of the pandemic, shortly thereafter, is my good friend Sandesh called and said, hey, we're doing this podcast. How would you like to be on this podcast? And I'm like, there's nothing I would like to do more than be on your podcast. And two handsome devils like yourselves, I'd love to be associated with that.
That's a first.
Well, you got to get your eyes checked, but other than that.
No, but so it was. So anyway, so I did it, and we had fun. But on top of having fun with it, and Chris is like in preparing for me to do the podcast. You gave me like a crash course on audio, video, the basic ins and outs of it that was incredibly valuable.
Oh, great.
And I thought about that afterward. What if I had said, you know what, Dish, I love you, but I'm too busy. I don't have time for your podcast. I would have been languishing a lot longer in making this pivot, in making this transformation. And it's not like you could immediately, do like Neo in the chair and just give me all your knowledge, right? But you were able to like point me in the right direction, which then I was able to ask a guy that I'd already been working with, already trusted a lot, and got him like twice as involved as he was pre-pandemic. And turns out he knows a ton about this stuff. He's like been a godsend for me, but I just didn't even know to ask the right questions.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I think is a key part too. It's not even so much like ego and hubris about why we don't ask for help. We don't even
know the right questions.
You're such like a virgin in a particular domain. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know the range of possibilities and into how to even ask the right questions or ask the right people. And now, I've been able to figure that out. And I don't edit my own videos. I still don't, I can't fly solo when I'm doing a virtual presentation. But I know enough because, he knows what I need. I know what I know. He knows what he knows. And together we create a pretty nice combination.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important message. It's like, don't let those little barriers stand in your way. I mean, just because you don't know how to edit video right now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do this, because you're going to get so much further ahead if you just kind of just make it happen. Yeah. And I think the thing that is also really cool that both you and Sandesh are doing is, you're taking care of, you're moving forward and taking care of some of the things that you don't know how to do by getting other people to help you, but you're also at the same time investing in that and learning those things on the side so that, every step of the way you get more knowledgeable about what you're doing.
Right.
And I think that's a really cool way to go. I mean, Sandesh, tell us a little bit about your journey and how that went.
Well, so now, Nick, you understand how blessed I am to have Chris, right? And when he was pushing me towards the podcast, my first reaction was, we're not going to do a podcast, dude. I don't want to do it, And he kept bringing it up. And then ultimately, he's like, he convinced me. So I'm like, okay, but you're going to have to help me. So he helped me pick out the camera, the lighting, the microphone, here's how it connects to this and this. Go watch this YouTube. Go watch that YouTube. And the amazing part of my journey, the thing I'm so grateful for, is I saw these little moments of progress where I would be like, whoa, I think I'm understanding this. Like, I get it now, and I know why Chris is telling me this about my lighting, and I understand why he's having this, have it this much room above your head and have it, kind of tilted this way and do that and do this. And so what I learned first from Chris was just get started, right? If you look at his videos, like him doing his stuff, every single week, every single month that goes by, he's putting in new animations and doing new things and tweaking this and tweaking that. Things that the human eye, most people don't even see, but it bugs him. And then he makes it better and he makes it his, And so the first thing I would say is the hardest thing was just to get started, right?
Yeah.
Number one hardest thing. But the second part was, since we're around so many startups and things of that nature, Chris and I consult a lot of them to help them build the right business and the right message for their brand. And so this was like now my opportunity to do that. And I wanted to remind myself, this is a journey. You're not going to figure this out in the next 3 to 6 months. Yeah. There's always going to be room for improvement. You're just always going to have to learn. And that's a life lesson for me, because now it's like for the rest of my life, I want to keep learning. Like now I'm just so excited to learn. And when I have time, I'm going to learn how to use this camera better. And I'm going to learn how to take pictures and stuff. But for a couple of weeks, I was trying to learn all this stuff on photography. I'm like, what are you doing? Figure out the video first. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah. But I think there's a larger lesson there that you're talking about, Dish. And I think probably if you go back through your history, both of you, and everybody who's watching right now, I bet if you think about anything you did, whether it was a sport or music or something that you did throughout the course of your life, there is a recipe. There is a recipe for how you got good at it, and it was you just started. My kids have played more video games in the last 9 months than they have in their entire lives.
Yeah.
We used to be total Nazis about screen time, and that's just like totally gone out the window. Because it's like the only way they get to talk to their friends. In Puerto Rico, we've been on like quarantine lock. They haven't had school since March of 2020.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with my kids. Same thing. That's their main avenue of socialization.
Yeah, and so I'm like, all right, so they're not just sitting on a iPad. They've got their headset and they're talking to their friends and they're connecting with friends back in Minnesota and whatever. So I'm letting them do that. But anyway, what I'm noticing though is like they approach video games, like their approach to getting better at video games is the way that we've all gotten good at anything we've ever tried. It's just, it seems like a game, so you put it aside, but that's how you got good at math. That's how whatever, anything that you develop some kind of proficiency in, the difference in a video game is it's fun. From day one, the video game makers make sure that it's fun from the beginning. But I'll go back to, so you got the surfboard in the back here. When I first learned to surf as a 26-year-old adult, I didn't learn as a kid. I lived in Iowa. There's not a lot of surfing in Iowa. A lot of people don't know that. The thing I always, after I learned how to do it, and I'm still not good, but I became proficient, right? Good enough. And the thing I always told anybody who wanted to learn is I said, you have to enjoy just splashing around in the waves because that's all you're going to be doing for the first 6 months. Yeah. You will not catch a wave for 6 months. So just get that idea out of your head. If the only reason you're doing this is to be able to stand up on a board like you've seen on videos, you're going to hate it. You're going to be freezing cold in California, Pacific waters for 6 months, and it's going to suck. Yeah. So you just have to I just get to spend an hour or two going out splashing in the waves. And I think about that often. Like a couple years ago, I decided I was going to learn search advertising, like Google ads. And it was the same way that I'm now learning how to do video stuff. I just basically said, I'm going to take 3 months and I have this dollar amount set aside. And I'm going to approach this the same way that I approach writing a book. When I write a book, I say I got 6 months. I break it down. I'm going to spend this time period to this time period every single day, and until it's done. And no matter, I don't get up from the chair until I have this many words written. I was like, well, what if I just applied that same thing to search advertising, and once I just sat down and did it, you start learning and it starts to become fun. And I think the same thing could be said for, learning video or learning whatever.
So I think, one of the things that's interesting about what you're doing, Nick, is that I like the style of your videos. I like the fact that, you came in, you got your black wall, you got your surfboard, you've got your Marvel movie, teal and green and orange lights.
Which I never knew was a Marvel movie reference until now.
But I think the thing that's interesting about all that stuff is that, taste is one of those things that's hard to teach, right? Mm-hmm. And like inserting a little bit of taste into what you're doing is one of those kind of important and unique skills that everybody needs to foster, I think. But it's also like I feel for everybody, the technical side of things is, one, you could hire somebody to do it for you. Two, it's ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just, there's best practices for doing things like that. But the thing that's not something that you can just hire somebody in to do is, show who you are, showcase who you are, your tastes, your story, your ideas and things like that. And I think that's the thing that's really important for people to focus on, is sort of the storytelling, the big picture of storytelling, right? Not the other stuff.
Yeah, I think, in the storytelling, and like, how do you tell the story the way that you would tell it? Not the way you're supposed to tell it, not the way other people tell it, but the way you tell it. And it's if we step out of just like, whether it's video making or whatever, like, I think that's a lesson that's hard to learn if you're going to be a public speaker.
Yeah.
It takes a really long time to be yourself on stage.
Yes. Just
like it takes a really long time to be yourself in front of the camera.
No doubt. And it's hard to let loose. It's hard to be vulnerable. And that's one of the things that I constantly struggle with. And what I'd like to do better this year is being more vulnerable, like in these, like sharing more of myself, because I think that helps people relate to what you're doing a lot more. But it's hard. It's very hard, because we're all, like, I'm a very guarded person in a lot of ways, so that's a little bit of a struggle for me.
Yeah, no, it is true. And it's, and I think in some ways all of us are, and anyway, we could have a whole nother podcast about how do you do that. But I think like, it's basics of, when I practice a speech, it's very different when I practice it in the mirror versus practicing it against the wall.
Yeah.
To see yourself, when you're looking at yourself, you're like, wait, that's not me. Why would I do that? And when do I ever talk to somebody like this?
Yeah.
Well, and the next thing I wanted to say, never, So it's like when you literally look at yourself in the mirror, we used to talk about it metaphorically, but literally when you look at yourself in the mirror, you see, is that really me? Or not, and, I'll say that's one of the other interesting things about doing, switching from, say, live to virtual, is I can see myself right now.
Yeah.
And it changes, if you're being you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Sundish, I know that was, one of the things you always talked about, how it was, kind of a tricky piece for you, is to just kind of open up and be natural on camera.
Well, you used to always say you need to find your voice. Right? You used to always say that. And I'm still trying to figure that out, because what you guys are saying is exactly true, because there's like the part of me that, wants to be mindful that I am talking properly, not, being serious at the right time, and maybe trying to be funny at the right time, but just, I don't want to be judged. I'm so worried about being judged negatively, so I want to take the safe route on everything. But Chris would always say, dude, you're best when you're vulnerable. You're best when you're vulnerable. You just got to let go of that. Don't even think about it, And it's like, it's easy for you to say, but you're amazing, but I think that's, again, I think for the future of our world, influencer marketing and this whole attention economy and everything else that is happening for our children, part of the reason why I'm doing the things I'm doing for selfishly is I want to learn this so I can become a better parent. Because right now, anytime my daughter asks for anything, we say no. No to TikTok, no to this, no to that. We gave her a phone and stuff like that, right? But the reason why we're saying no is because we don't understand it. So we're scared, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like this is also selfishly a way for me to just jump in, learn everything that I can, and hopefully it helps me in my personal life too, right? That's why making that pivot was easier because there's so many things to learn from this, you know? And now Chris is putting up videos to basically tell people, hey, if you want to set this up, this is my camera, this is my lighting, this is what I use, this is how I do it, because we want other people to do this as well, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, the one thing I always kind of just have to constantly remind myself is like, as far as my kids are concerned, the job they're going to have hasn't been created yet. I mean, because if I, you know, back to your 10 years ago, looking back 10 years ago, if I said I was going to have a YouTube channel, I'd be like, nah, that's not a thing. You know, I mean,
what am I, 12?
Right. Well, right. I mean, like even just 10 years ago, I mean, 2010, it was not even really nobody was, you know, I mean, maybe there's a couple people making a living off of YouTube, but it was very rare, right? You know, not that I'm making a living off of YouTube, but I'm just saying like going down that path as, you know, like, and taking it seriously and putting together a lot of stuff. I would have never have thought that. Yeah,
I think so too. And I think, you know, something like that, like a YouTube channel or a podcast or whatever, it's almost becoming, I'm getting ahead of myself maybe, but it's almost becoming like a resume, you know, like you can't exist without a LinkedIn profile now, right?
Yes.
And 15 years ago, that wasn't true. That was only for like people who are really like super networkers or super needing a job, or you know. Right. And I think all of a sudden now it's like, okay, you know, to be legitimate, you almost have to have your own website, even if it's just 2 pages. And so I think the next iteration of that is going to be a YouTube channel, and you know, being already my kids, like, you know, I'm starting to catch up to them in terms of learning about video. Yeah. You know, and they're like 12 and 13. So yeah, I would like you, Dish. I would like to be able to contribute more to that conversation, and so it's a big motivator.
Yeah. You know, I also heard just recently there's a company that is coming out for salespeople where like the goal is for salespeople like me would have like a Yelp review. You know, which is kind of scary, right? You know, because, you know, I've been, you know, being on Twitter now. So I joined Twitter like 2 months ago or something, 2-3 months ago, just to like learn.
Really on the cutting edge.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. See, it takes me a while to adopt this stuff, right? It took me a while, but I was like,
said the technology so.
Yeah, you know, right? Yeah. Really transforming over here. But what I learned is there's so much negativity on there, and I heard people talking about it, but then to see it and just to experience it and better understand it, I'm still going to have a Twitter presence, but I'm just going to be a little more mindful of it, you know, like, because man, what is up with all the haters, man? Like, I don't get it, you know, like Chris and I are always like, it's not a zero-sum game to us, you know, it's like everyone can win. Why does somebody have to lose in order for one person to win? You know, it's so like this me, you know, generation that we are in this time around, this just has to change, you know?
Yeah, no doubt.
And I don't blame them, right? Because these kids, like, you know, we all have children at that age right now, and you know, my kids are always on YouTube, man, always talking about Mr. Beast, and they're, you know, doing the Minecraft stuff, and you know, they're constantly asking me, Dad, can I download this app, Roblox? Right, the one that you've been talking about.
Roblox is the #1 most played game in the world.
Yeah,
hundreds of millions of users.
Yeah, but like you know, I think the one thing that we've learned from our Silicon Valley days, Chris, is there's some trends that you just don't want to go against. Right, like you jump on board, and you know, like cloud was a big one in our last 10 years, maybe 8 years, 7 years. it's been a slow progress, but the ones that have been successful is that they were already envisioning the future with cloud, and they designed the technology with cloud in mind,
Yeah.
And so you don't want to try to go against a trend like social media right now. As much as I see some negatives of it, there's some positives too.
There's a lot of positives to all that stuff. Yeah, no doubt. I remember when I was young, and there's Space Invaders and things like that. My parents would freak out. It's like, you're spending too much time playing these stupid video games. You're at the arcade, wasting all your quarters, right?
Yeah.
And so my buddy got a computer. It was a TRS-80, that good old trash 80 Model 1, and we wanted to figure out how to program Space Invaders on it, right? And that's how I got into technology. I mean, that was the launching point for my whole career. And my parents at the time were saying, stop wasting your time,
No, it's a great point, and I mean, it's so ironic that you brought this up, because this has been like occupying a lot of my mental space in the last few days. So I'm like limiting. We're always trying to limit our kids' screen time and how much they're playing video games and whatever. And then I'm thinking, this might be their future.
Yeah.
Is it really going to be filling out worksheets? Is that going to be their future? Probably not. So is it? So like my son wants his own YouTube channel, and now he's making these Fortnite videos and whatever. And so I'm kind of looking at, all right. And I was actually just thinking, okay, this year I'd like each of my kids to set a goal to get good at something, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And what if they say, I want to get good at Fortnite, or I want to get good at YouTube? That won't be what I had in mind. I was thinking more like soccer or basketball or But if they say that, what's the,
Well,
should I be resisting that? I mean, that's probably more likely that, for sure, that's going to be more important to their future than soccer or basketball.
Well, they're the ones building the future. Mm-hmm. You're not the one building the future. Right. They're the ones who are going to build that future. So,
you sure about that?
I don't know. Maybe. But I mean, I almost think we as adults should listen to them a little bit more, because we're going to be living in the world that they create at some point, right? And so, it's something to think about, and think about hard, right?
Well, and Chris, I think your example is such a good one of, 30 years ago, your parents were coming down on you for something that became, a very successful career that started with you plugging quarters at the arcade.
Yeah.
So it's just like, again, 10 years from now, I want to look back and be the parent that told my kid, don't do that thing that now dominates our entire world. Don't get into that. Don't learn about that.
Well, but it's not to make a terrible pun, but 2020, is perfect vision, right? I mean, you looking backwards, it's easy to see, oh, well, that was clearly a trend that was huge.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And, identifying it from this end is very hard. It's very hard, right? Because you have so many biases built into, the status quo, that identifying trends is a really, really tricky thing.
Absolutely. It's like with our parents, our parents would say to us when we were, in our 20s, we didn't have the internet when we were kids, so like, what do they think about the internet, right? The internet was a horrible thing, don't go on the internet. The kids are upstairs probably just poking around on the internet, who knows what they're doing, right? But again, that's a trend that we knew was going to manifest to what it is today. There's so many of these things that are happening now. That's why these video conferencing and these video pivots that we're all talking about is going to be the future. Now it's just a matter of, who's going to change, right? Chris, you had that one quote from Darwin that I just love, right? It's not the strongest or the smartest that will survive, but the ones that are most adept to change,
Yep.
I think, I
totally true.
Yeah, it's totally true, and dude, I didn't want to do all this. This wasn't really like something I was excited about. I was nervous about it. But now that I have even the baseline, I see a whole different world and so many new ideas. I did a podcast with my daughter for her school project. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted her to get excited about it. So we do it, and she goes, "Dad, that was really fun." I'm like, "Oh, it was, right?" Like you pick a topic, then you have a conversation, and this is this is why we have to have the lights here, and you have to talk into this microphone. This is how it works, blah blah blah. And I want to start planting those seeds, and I hope that your kids are seeing everything that you're doing, Nick, and hopefully not making fun of you, because that's how it started with me. I was being made fun of.
Look, it's always a balancing act, right, between interest and fun making. But no, Dish, you're totally. I will say that is one of the things. Probably when the three of us first talked back in April or May, my line was there's going to be innovations for you, for me, for all of us that are going to come out of this that you can't see right now. You can't fathom it, you can't imagine it, but I promise you, before this is all said and done, there will be things that you look back on that started that have changed the way you operate, and maybe changed your business, whatever, that you can't even imagine right now. Back then, it was merely an article of faith.
Yeah,
I was, it's like I'm preaching that message, and I'm telling myself it's true, but of course you wonder, you doubt sometimes, and. But I'll tell you, that has been one of the things for sure that I think, like, now all of a sudden, like, I've told myself this can be an opportunity. This can be an opportunity, right? This, whatever. And now I'm starting to see that wasn't a joke. Like, this really could be, for me, for that regard, work-life balance.
Yeah.
Okay, for one thing, has been huge, particularly so because I can't travel anymore. What does that mean? I don't have to travel anymore.
Right.
I can,
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, and so on top of just the fact that, I don't have to spend so much time racing through airports and waiting in TSA lines and all of that, on top of that, my kids totally understand what I do now. And in a way that they never did before. Like the joke in my house forever was that my youngest kids for like 6 years thought that decisionpulse.com or nicktasler.com was like a place. It was a building because that's where daddy goes every day to work, I'm going to Starbucks, but they think like nicktasler.com is a building.
Yeah.
And now, like, they can literally see, and even aside from that, being on stage in the last year, I started taking my oldest two sons. I took each of them with me on speaking trips, like a couple times, and so they kind of got to like actually see. And the clients were amazing. They're like, "This is great. This person is gonna take care of them the whole time. They can sit in the front row. What's their name, whatever." And so it was really great in that regard. But they got to like, oh, now when you're gone, I understand what you do.
Yeah.
But the younger two never really got that because they're too young to take with me. But now, they come up and they're like, "That light is so cool." What do those cameras do? Just like you're talking, Dish, with your daughter in the podcast, is like, now they get to actually see. It's like every day is take your kids to work day.
Right.
And I don't know. I like to think that builds a little bit of a bond.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, well, you having to eat your own dog food and then finding out that like, oh yeah, that stuff I was talking about and telling people to do all this time, that stuff actually works.
Yeah.
That's who knew? Who knew? I mean, so I think that's got to be a great feeling too. But I think I want to get back to something else you said, the work-life balance piece. Yeah. Because I think, what we've seen is we've proven the fact that people can work from home and be productive. In fact, in most cases, more productive than they were going into an office.
That's what the studies are showing, yeah.
And so I just wonder if this is kind of the new work life, where, like having your own kind of personal brand and getting your own ideas out there. And, because if you're not in person as much, and I think people are not going to want to be as, fly everywhere and constantly be traveling as much as they used to. I think some of that's still very important. But I think, how do people get to know you? And if you don't have things like this where people can, like get a little flavor of what you're all about and, what you're doing, like you said, the online resume and things like that. I think, this is kind of I think it's going to emerge as something that's a little bit more important than just sort of this frivolous activity that we're doing while we can't travel, right? I think it's going to be kind of like, this is how we, get to that work-life balance that we've always wanted that we've never been able to achieve in the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm curious to get you guys' impressions on this. I mean, the big question for people in my industry or people who are anyway related to meetings and whatever. And as I recall, the FUTRtech podcast was initially going to be a FUTRtech conference, right?
Yeah. Well, we had the FUTRtech channel, which was having content, but the specific podcast piece came really when we couldn't do Emerge, and we wanted to still highlight some cool companies, right?
And so you guys are experiencing this now. I'm curious, 9 months later, do you guys still foresee an in-person conference, or have you pivoted and this is it? This is the thing, and this is going to be the platform and the channel where everybody comes together and we do what we do.
I'll let Sundish answer this too, because I'm sure he's got some differing opinions about it. But I think this is going to be more of what we do than, the conferences. Although I do like the idea of the conference because I think there is something to be said for having everybody in one place at one time, right? I mean, for me, conferences were very productive because not only could I meet with all, the clients, but I could meet with all these companies, and I could get exposure to companies that I had never seen before. And I could sit there and interview them and talk. And, I got a lot of value out of like just the concentration of things.
Yeah.
But that said, in some ways, there's a different kind of value that is really rewarding here, because having this channel brings a different kind of access that I hadn't had before. I couldn't sit down and talk to, the John Thompson, the chairman of the board of Microsoft, by going to those things, but by developing this channel and getting some of these connections, or, Ravi Patel, for example, like people like this, it's a different kind of access that you can get through doing these things than you can, through the old way of things. So while I don't think I'll be doing as much of the conferences, I don't think anybody's going to be doing as much of the conferences, because I think a lot of people, there was a good side and there's just a huge downside in terms of expense and time and all that stuff.
Yes.
So I think it's going to be this hybrid world we're going to live in for quite some time. And I think, this sort of thing, there's going to be a lot more of this, which I think is great. I think it's great because I think, having... because this is a different tone than what we would take at a conference, right? I mean, we're having sort of like less formal conversations, and we had these less formal conversations, but they just were never shared with anybody, or they were never the focus of what we were doing, right? And I think this is a really good thing that's going on here. So I don't think this will go away, but I don't think that's 100% gone away. But I don't think it'll come back for another year, probably.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah. I would say that a couple points there. So first, I totally agree. Like when you go to the conferences, you learn, you get access to people. We'd be meeting with a lot of different startups and all that good stuff. But the other part about was like the cultural part of it. Technology and the technology world, the culture is kind of to geek out a little bit. It's kind of to be on the conference floor, have a beer in your hand at 4:30 and have a chat with somebody, and maybe go to dinner somewhere with a vendor or two, and then after that maybe there's a concert or something. But there was just that culture and the excitement, and that's what really attracted me to the industry. Right? Was like there's things I'm good at and there's things that I am not good at, and I really like people and I like having relationships, and I love having friends and, like you guys and everything. That's me. Now that's been taken away from me, right? And so now I culturally, I think it's going to have a big impact because now the people that got into this industry, the industry isn't what they were hoping that it was. The second part of that is, it is that mental health part of what we have going on here. I think, maybe this is part of that organizational psychology right now, because I think what's happened is there's been such dramatic changes in the industry that now when we talk about work-life balance, everybody I've spoken to, everyone has said, well, the good thing is, you know what? I'm not traveling as much anymore. I'm hanging out with my kids more. Like me personally, I actually know what's going on in my kids' lives, traveling 40, 50%. Chris and I didn't really always know because our wives took care of a lot of the blocking and tackling. But now I know the issues. I know what they have going on. And I'm an active participant actually in their lives and actually trying to help them and also help my wife. And so I'll tell you right now, I have a 6-year-old. I have 3 kids. My youngest is 6. She's going to be in the house for another 11 years, right? 12 years, whatever that is. I am very ultra focused to be a big part of her life, And but I think work has gotten tough, and where we were already talking about mental health before the pandemic. And Chris and I have had conversations with people who have lost their complete businesses. And, unfortunately, we're just on a call the other day, a divorce attorney, a friend of ours, she's telling me how busy she is, because, that's just, this is kind of those things. And so I think from an organizational perspective, and this is your bag, or organizational psychology, like my question to some of those executives are, the world has changed now, right? And so how are you going to motivate your employees? How are you going to create a culture in the new norm? Before, everyone is going to the offices. If you're not going to the office anymore, you don't have that water cooler talk. You don't get a chance to walk over to Chris and be like, hey, did you see that email that who and who sent out, blah, 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 whatever it might be. How was your weekend? So now I think organizationally, people have to really think about this because if your employees aren't healthy, if they're not physically and mentally healthy, I think you're not getting 100% of the value of that employee. So how do you do that? Tell us, Nick.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had the answer. I mean, to be honest though, like that frankly is not an issue that, so yes, I'm an organizational psychologist, but it's not really been something that, like there have been people that studied and paid attention to it, but not nearly like all of a sudden. And to be honest, like it hasn't been that important to me or my business. It's always been like organizational psychology in terms of how do you get people to make the best decisions on the job and job performance and whatever. And now we have these other personal factors. They're so intermingled. There was always a relationship, right? But they're so intertwined now that you can't separate them in a way
you just can't ignore it.
Could before. You can't. It's like the cliche mantra is like leave it at the door.
Right.
They never left the door. The door, the same door that they came out of in the morning is still the same one that they're behind right now. And so I think that's changed, and I do think I've tried to put a positive spin on everything that's happened, and I think. For me, in a lot of ways, I'm still, like the rose-colored glasses optimist, thinking that this is still going to be better for me and for my family. But there's no question that we know that, people that already were having marital troubles, this tipped them over the edge. People that were already had, drug and alcohol abuse issues. And in those situations, take a case where you've had, pick anything, eating disorder, a porn addiction, alcoholism, whatever it is, whatever is your thing, and, we've all got something, right? It's like you set up a world, an environment that protects you from it. You get involved in other hobbies that take your mind off it, and all of a sudden, just like overnight, all that stuff was removed. All those social barriers that you had erected to protect you from your inner demons are gone. So it's a challenge, and how much of that the organization is going to take on is a big question, and I think everyone has a different answer for it.
Yeah.
I do think. at least everyone's saying organizationally, I mean, from a corporate perspective, they are stepping up and they are taking more of an active role in mental health for their employees. Of course, it varies by organization and whatever. But I think, just this week I read this trust survey that in 2020,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, talk about it. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. In 2020, the most cited response for where did you get your most trusted information was from my employer.
Yeah.
Which is pretty unprecedented in the history of work. Like going back a century when corporations were evil and the company was always like there was something to be avoided and constantly fought at every turn. And now people are saying more than the government, more than journalists, more than media, I trust my company. What my company says is my most reliable source of information. That's a pretty profound shift.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we sort of idealize in this country the sort of that 1950s culture, that sort of prosperity culture that kind of came out of the 50s. And obviously it was not an ideal time and certainly not ideal for everybody. It was, living hell for some people. But I think there's the aspects of that we've kind of focused on. I think we're kind of getting back to a little bit here with regard to, people working for, there were more smaller companies rather than large, everybody working for large faceless corporations. And there was a more, you worked 9 to 5, you came home and you spent time with your family, you spent the weekends with your family. And I think there's some interesting elements of that we've kind of gotten back to, where there's certainly spending more time with your family for, better or ill. And certainly the fact that, the corporation can't be as faceless as it used to be, because this is a very different dynamic. And I think it behooves some of these large corporations to take more of an interest in their employees and the well-being of their employees and the work-life balance of their employees.
Look at during the pandemic, Chris, look at how much turnover there's been in technology sales. The people, I would have thought in February, March, that everyone at that point was thinking, we're about to go into uncharted territory. The pandemic is hitting. I'm just going to stay where I am now. I don't want to make any moves. I want to play it safe. Right? But what happened? Tremendous amount of turnover, so many people leaving. But the question is why? And I feel like there's something inside of them was saying, I got to get out of here. I need a change. I want to start all over somewhere else, right?
Well, and maybe spending more time with your family and having more of that freedom. Just change people's perspectives too on what they want out of life.
And I'm only bringing that up just to put a bow on that, is that I think many people that are making those moves do end up regretting it, and so it's a shame because the company loses because they lost someone that was a producer that was there for a while, tenured, didn't need training, knew what they were doing, they were operationally efficient and everything else, but then when that person leaves and they themselves are like, shit, I shouldn't have gone. I shouldn't have made that change. You know what I mean? But I think it's if you can create a culture and an atmosphere where, you don't want to stress your people out to the point where they're just like, screw it, I'm out of here,
Yeah, well, I think, some of that, some of that you can maybe blame on the organization not being as caring as they could have been or as compassionate. But a lot of it, I do think, and maybe you're hinting at this, is when change happens, you look for some kind of solution to like. I think there's two ways. One, you're kind of grasping for straws. I need something to save me, right? But the other thing I'll say, and this is for better or worse, depending on the situation, the person, and whatever, is a big global macro change like this. It's sort of like it's a macro get out of jail free card, like people who are thinking about making changes anyway all along. You now just had the you've now just been given permission, because if anyone questions like the thing that's always held you back from doing it is like, yeah, but how do I explain this to people? And now you've got it, the pandemic.
Right.
Well, so why did you do that? Well, the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, enough said.
Yeah.
Nobody questions you anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, it's kind of, that is an opportunity, and it's a it's a challenge, but that opportunity, I would say, was sort of open to all of us. And, even I'll say in a negative way, like you were talking about divorce lawyers being busier than ever. I would say, I believe that in many of those cases, the mental calculus that went through there is, now I've got an excuse.
Yeah.
Well, the stress of the pandemic.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah.
But, it's the stress of the pandemic. Yeah. And so, like everybody has that
excuse.
Yeah.
But I also think in our case, what I have seen, and I talk to a lot of salespeople, right, in like daily, constantly. I think we convince ourselves of things in our brain that just aren't true. Like we have a couple bad quarters, and we think that everyone's talking about us, man. Everyone's probably talking about how bad I am and how I haven't been able to produce, or I lost that deal, or whatever it is, right? They think that people actually give a shit, and the reality is no one's talking about them. No one's really, angry at them, whatever it is.
Self-absorbed with their own problems.
Exactly. Right. But in your own brain, it's the biggest thing, and you make it bigger,
no doubt.
Like, God, how many times would I tell Chris, I feel like people are mad at me. I feel like, people are really, if I don't get this deal, man, this is not going to be good for me. Where Chris is like, I don't think anyone cares. I'm like, yeah, right. I think you don't care,
Because you never loved me to start with.
But
Dad.
Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah, but it's, hey, look, these are, there's going to be unintended consequences, a lot of this stuff that's just going on, and I personally don't even, I think this is going to continue to change. I think forget about what happened in 2020. I think the next couple of years, we're going to see some big shifts. And it's going to continue.
Well, and I think on the positive side is we're going to see big shifts because, like the three of us have been talking about, we've started now to see what I was saying earlier was an article of faith in the beginning, that there's going to be some new ways of thinking that are going to come out of this that we can't see now, but they're coming. Well, now they are coming, and we have seen them. These little insights. Like Sandesh, I know. Starting the podcast,
Super Brown.
You're Super Brown. Like with that, it's okay. There's a learning curve, but there's also that element of excitement that goes along with that learning curve. It's a little scary. It's a little nerve-wracking, kind of stressful, but it's also a little bit exciting. And I think all of us are like in that same. We're kind of on edge. But, being on edge is just a matter of being excited as much as it is being anxious,
Exactly.
And I like to think that we're just now scratching the surface of what could happen.
Yeah. The world is our oyster. Tell me about, obviously there's nicktasler.com. You're doing speaking engagements for corporations. You've got a really fun personality assessment that's up. I know it's at nicktasler.com/assessments. And I, like you, found that I tended more towards the freedom end of the spectrum than other ends of the spectrum. But I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about like some of the things that you got going on.
Yeah. So, really, it's funny. I've had that assessment for probably 10 years, and now, kind of like we were talking about,
it's time to reassess.
Yeah, well, reassess, and you guys had mentioned earlier, like everyone's sort of looking for their purpose right now.
Yeah.
And so some of these issues that were just kind of labors of love for me in the past, now I feel are they're relevant to people in a new way that they weren't before. So I'm just frankly having a lot of fun doing things less for, okay, maybe this will make some money, maybe it won't, I don't know. But again, opening my eyes to these possibilities of, it's fun making videos now. And so I'm making videos, I'm putting them up on all the social media channels. I have no idea if people like are really going to be, I have no delusions about becoming a YouTube superstar or I don't even know what you call. What do you call people that get paid on YouTube?
YouTubers.
YouTube pros.
YouTubers,
right? I mean, isn't everybody a YouTuber?
Yeah.
Like, if you've ever posted something,
influencers.
Influencer, right? Social media influencers, right? But anyway, so I've just basically I've like democratized what I do. So it was before, you know, you have to work for this organization who's going to pay me this rate to come and talk to you. And now what this has done is it's like opened up. I'm able now to put my stuff in video form and make it available to the world. You don't have to pay a penny. You just go to Instagram, you go to Facebook, you go to LinkedIn, you go to YouTube, and I'm there for better or worse.
Yeah.
I'm there.
No, that's great. And hey, man, you just got started, right? It's not about how you get started. It's how you're going to end this journey, right? And so like keeping that in mind is what like gets me excited. I can tell I'm really glad. Like, it's amazing to me how far you've come along. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like Chris has been dying to have this conversation with you because, you know, you did it so quickly.
Do you see what Tasler's doing? Do you see Tasler?
I know. And I'm like, yeah, well, I subscribe to his stuff, you know, but to see you have that radical shift and now to understand everything that you've done is super awesome. And I'm happy for you, man. You're gonna, you know, I think the best days of Nick Tasler are still yet to come.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I hope so. I tell you though, too, like, and I don't know how relevant this is to everyone else, but you know, for me, it's also been like the business model has changed in a way that's made these things. It hasn't been just a conscious, you know, like, for example, okay, let's use video, for example. I've been wanting to make videos forever. I'm thinking, you know, and I look at, okay, what do I do? What are my skills? What are my differentiators? I think they're as good or better on video than they are, say, in a blog post or an article or something like that.
Right.
Like, if I can bring it to life on the camera. But there hasn't been a market for it. Mm-hmm. Until now, you know, I mean, there's always been a market for putting free stuff on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
But it's like now that the world has changed so much where it doesn't just have to be like this kind of guilty pleasure. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about doing something for technology wise, even if you don't have your own business, like you're saying, Dish, like to be a salesperson now, having a podcast and doing videos and things, like you could make a very rational business case for why that's a really good idea, even if it's just stuff that I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
well,
anyway,
it's been a wild year. I mean, now we're into 2021, but 2021 was a wild year. And I gotta say, like, when I look back in 10 years, I feel like I'm gonna say, you know, I made a huge shift that was really interesting and fun, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff still to do, and I'm excited for it, and I'm excited for what, you know, you're going to do. I'm excited to, you know, see more Nick Tasler videos. You know,
I'll tell you one other thing here, Chris, before we go. I think someone told me this once early when about writing, and like another author had said, you know, the cool thing about it is this is etched into, like, these words can never be taken from you. Like, they are now, even if no one buys it 50 years from now, you can show your kids like a book. And I think you can look at a podcast or a video in the same way. Even if even if it doesn't become a thriving business, you stop doing it, you always now have a record of that's what I did. That was, you know, this is who I am. This is what I thought. This is how I talked. That's what I did. And, I think that's just pretty cool, even if you can't monetize it.
Hopefully, you just don't get too many copyright strikes. Right?
just don't use Eagles songs. Don't use Eagles songs.
Eagles songs. That's the key.
Don't get booted off of YouTube. But to that point, you know, Nick, Chris, and I are, you know, as you know, very, very good friends, and so like we talk about a lot of stuff. Right, 90% of the time, we're not talking about work; we're talking about life. And you know, he's been a great life coach for me. And as we've been kind of talking about what do we want out of life, we've been talking about our legacy. And I think what you're like hitting on there is like,
is legacy.
Exactly. It's just like, okay, so if FUTRtech, Super Brown Pot, whatever it is, doesn't turn out to be something amazing, but there's like there's a track record now of things that my kids can maybe look at. Because like right now, they don't care about my podcast at all, right? Like, they just want to be on one. But when they're older, maybe they can look back and be like, oh yeah, this is what he thought about this. This is how he treated people or situations, and this is what was important to him. And this was him and Chris and Mr. Tasler talking about us and us as kids when we were young, and what a pain in the ass that was, So like, I really look forward to that,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, hey, here's to all of us making a lot more videos, and hopefully we can, reconnect, not to make it a whole year, but reconnect and see where you go to in 2021 this year, Nick. I'm excited to see how we continue to pivot, all of us.
Absolutely. Can't wait till the next time, Chris.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you being on, and thanks for sharing everything with us. And congratulations on your success so far.
And likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. So thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click on that like button, hit that subscribe button, because that helps a ton. And if you want to get notified when we post new content, click on that bell icon. And I will see you in the next video.